When I bought my little piece of paradise out in the countryside, I imagined quiet mornings on the porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the creek that ran under the small wooden bridge I had rebuilt with my own hands, and afternoons spent fishing or tinkering in the workshop I'd set up in the converted barn. What I did not imagine was a nightmare named Karen, the self appointed queen of the HOA, that bordered my property even though my house and land were very clearly outside of their jurisdiction. Yet, that never seemed to stop her from trying to expand her authority like some petty monarch seeking to add territories to her kingdom, and her latest obsession had become my little bridge, the one that connected my driveway to the main road, a bridge that was not just mine legally, but also mine by sweat and toil because I had hauled the timber, mixed the concrete, and poured the supports myself, reinforcing it just enough to handle my truck, my tractor, and maybe the occasional delivery van, but certainly not massive construction vehicles. Yet Karen, in her infinite arrogance, had somehow decided that the easiest shortcut for her latest vanity project, a so-called HOA community center complete with fountains, a parking lot, and ridiculous stone columns, was through my land, across my bridge, and straight onto their build site. Never mind that it meant cement trucks, gravel haulers, and lumber deliveries were suddenly thundering across my property like a convoy of tanks shaking the ground, splintering the wooden planks, and leaving ruts in my driveway. And when I confronted the drivers the first time, they shrugged apologetically and told me that the lady with the clipboard had said it was fine and that she was the one in charge, which infuriated me even more because there was no way Karen didn't know she had zero right to authorize use of my land. Yet she acted as if the world belonged to her whims, waving around some flimsy HOA papers that held no legal authority here and snapping at me that community projects benefit everyone and that good neighbors don't block progress. But I wasn't about to let years of careful maintenance on my property get destroyed because she couldn't be bothered to use the official road that went around the long way, a road designed to handle heavy vehicles, and instead she had chosen to trespass across my bridge just because it was more convenient. And while my first attempts at stopping her were polite, handwritten signs that said, private property, a chain stretched across the entrance when I wasn't expecting deliveries, and even a direct conversation in which I explained that if the bridge collapsed under a cement truck, it could cost tens of thousands in damages, not only to me, but also to the truck company. Karen's response was a haughty laugh, her sunglasses pushed down her nose as she smirked and said, "If your little bridge can't handle progress, maybe it shouldn't be here in the first place." Which was the moment I knew I wasn't dealing with simple ignorance but deliberate malice because she wanted to show that she could walk or drive over anyone she pleased, and that was when I decided that if she was going to keep pushing, then I would have to push back harder, not by calling lawyers just yet, not by yelling or threatening, but by setting a trap so clever, so undeniably humiliating, that it would leave her no choice but to back off because there's one thing I've learned in life. People like Karen never respect boundaries until they run headfirst into one they cannot ignore, and my bridge, my land, and my patience had all reached their breaking point. So, as I stood there one late afternoon, staring at the deep ruts left behind by yet another cement truck, I began to plan, carefully, methodically, and with the kind of satisfaction that comes only when you know justice is about to be served not in a courtroom, but right in the middle of the battlefield the enemy chose. And in this case, the battlefield was my little bridge over the creek, a bridge that was about to become the stage for the downfall of HOA Karen and her endless arrogance. The first step in my plan was to study the patterns of the trucks, because as much as I wanted to storm over to Karen's perfectly manicured lawn and scream at her in front of her smug little HOA committee, I knew that direct confrontation only fed her ego, and if I was going to set a trap, it had to be timed perfectly. So I started paying attention, sitting in my porch chair with a notebook, jotting down when the cement trucks rumbled down the road, how many times a day they used my bridge, and which drivers were bold enough to barrel across without slowing down versus those who looked hesitant but still followed Karen's so-called authorization because they didn't want to lose their jobs. And after about a week, I had a clear pattern. Mornings around 9 a.m., another around noon, and usually one or two late afternoon runs when they were trying to finish up the day's pour, and every single one of them left fresh scars on the bridge planks, so much so that one afternoon I ran my hand across the wooden guardrail and felt a long crack beginning to split from the stress, which both infuriated me and confirmed my decision. If I didn't act soon, the bridge really would collapse under a truck, except the wrong way, costing me repairs, and leaving Karen to smugly claim it was my fault, but I wasn't about to give her that victory. No, instead, I went into my workshop, the smell of sawdust and oil greeting me like an old friend, and began pulling out supplies. A few steel plates, some heavy duty bolts, a set of false planks I had made years ago as spares, and an idea that made me grin with the kind of mischief I hadn't felt since I was a teenager pulling pranks on the bullies at school, because my plan wasn't to destroy the trucks, that would get me sued into oblivion, but to make sure that the next time Karen tried to flaunt her power, she and her construction circus would be the ones humiliated. So, over the next 3 nights, under cover of darkness, I carefully modified the bridge, not enough to harm my own vehicles, but just enough that anyone driving something oversized would face consequences. I loosened certain planks on the outer edge and replaced them with hinged versions that looked identical but would give way under excessive weight, dropping one side of the vehicle into a shallow ditch I had dug just off the side of the bridge, nothing dangerous enough to cause injuries, but humiliating enough that a driver would need a tow truck to get out. And then, to really sell the effect, I rigged up a couple of signs cleverly hidden beneath brush that would swing out when triggered by a weight sensor. I cobbled together from an old garage door opener, the signs painted with bold words. Private property, trespassers will be stopped, and the thought of Karen's face when she saw that after being caught in her own arrogance was delicious enough to make me chuckle out loud in the quiet night air. But I didn't stop there because I knew Karen well enough by now to realize that she would blame anyone and everyone but herself, so I set up an old trail camera hidden in a birdhouse facing the bridge to capture every moment, and when I finally stepped back on the third night, wiping the sweat from my brow as the moonlight reflected off the water below, I felt a kind of satisfaction that no courtroom battle or shouting match could ever bring. This was justice by design, justice crafted plank by plank, bolt by bolt, and I went to bed that night eager for the morning, because if the patterns I'd recorded held true, the trap would be sprung in less than 12 hours. Sure enough, I woke at sunrise, made myself a pot of coffee, and positioned myself behind the curtain in my front room, heart pounding in anticipation like a hunter waiting for prey, and right on schedule at 9:07 a.m., I heard the distant rumble of a cement truck, the low growl growing louder until the massive beast of steel and concrete came into view. Its spinning drum glinting in the sun, and at the wheel sat one of the more reckless drivers, the kind who never even slowed down for my bridge, and I clenched my fists in nervous excitement as the truck hit the first planks, the entire structure groaning under its weight, then rolled confidently forward until, bang, the left side dropped as the false planks gave way, the driver's face twisting into shock as the front wheel plunged into the shallow ditch, tilting the truck sideways with a screech of grinding metal, cement sloshing inside the drum as the entire vehicle lurched to an abrupt stop, dust rising into the air like smoke from a battlefield. And then, just as I'd planned, the hidden sign swung out with a satisfying creak, its bold letters declaring, "Trespassers will be stopped," and I swear I laughed harder than I had in years, clutching my stomach as the driver climbed out, red-faced and swearing, kicking at the mud while trying to radio for help. Within 20 minutes, the chaos multiplied, because the next truck arrived and stopped short when it saw the first one stuck, and right behind it like clockwork came none other than Karen herself in her spotless white SUV, stepping out in her oversized sunglasses and perfectly ironed blouse, barking orders at the driver like some general on a war front. Except this time her authority meant nothing because she couldn't bully a cement truck out of a ditch, and when she saw the sign glaring back at her, her smug smile cracked for the first time since I'd met her, her face flushing red as she shouted across the creek at me. Because by then I'd stepped out onto my porch, mug of coffee in hand, calmly waving like I was greeting an old friend, and the sight of her spluttering in anger while the truck driver muttered about calling the police, the tow company, and his boss made me savor the moment all the more, because I knew this was only the beginning of the trap, the first stage of proving to her that my property was not her playground. And though I could already tell she was plotting her next move, I was ready because once you start a war with someone like Karen, you either finish it strong or you spend the rest of your life regretting you didn't go far enough, and I had no intention of stopping here. If there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen, it's that they don't lick their wounds quietly. Instead, they come back swinging harder, convinced that sheer arrogance will somehow overcome reality. And the aftermath of my little trap proved me right, because the very next day, after the cement truck fiasco, I woke up to the sound of shouting at the end of my driveway, where Karen had assembled not just the stranded driver from yesterday, but two other HOA board members, all of them, standing in a tight little cluster like vultures circling a carcass, clipboards in hand. And from the way Karen was pointing furiously at my bridge and then at me as I stepped outside, I knew she was trying to spin the narrative into her favor. Sure enough, as soon as she spotted me, she stomped across the gravel, heels clicking like gunfire, sunglasses perched on her head, and started in with that nasal voice that had become the soundtrack of my frustration. You've committed a serious violation here. You endangered a contractor, damaged private property, and interfered with an HOA-approved project, and we're not going to stand for it. To which I couldn't help but laugh out loud, because the sheer audacity of accusing me of violating rules that didn't even apply to me was almost comical, and I said, "Come as you like, Karen. Your trucks trespassed onto my land without permission. My bridge is mine, and I've got it all on camera." Then I held up my phone, tapping the screen, to show her a still frame from the birdhouse cam. The cement trucks were sunk in the ditch, her SUV parked behind it, and her own face twisted in outrage beneath the bold letters of my sign. And for a split second, I saw something flash across her expression that looked like doubt, maybe even fear. But of course, she covered it up quickly, crossing her arms and sneering. "Do you really think some silly video changes anything? We can fine you. We can sue you. We can seize access for community needs," which was when one of her fellow board members coughed awkwardly and muttered that actually HOA authority didn't extend past their boundary lines. And that was the crack I'd been waiting for, because the truth was Karen's whole power structure depended on everyone believing she had more control than she really did. And the moment her own allies started questioning her, her empire began to wobble. So I decided to widen that crack, speaking louder this time so the drivers and the board members could all hear me. "This bridge isn't rated for heavy vehicles. You've ignored my warnings, and yesterday could have been much worse. If that truck had flipped into the creek, not only would you owe me tens of thousands in damages, but the county would be involved for environmental contamination, and I've got all the evidence I need to prove you authorized trespassing." And the silence that followed was thick, broken only by the embarrassed shuffle of one board member's feet and the truck driver muttering something about calling his supervisor, while Karen stood there, jaw clenched, clearly realizing she'd lost that battle but too prideful to retreat gracefully. Instead, she jabbed a finger at me and hissed, "This isn't over. You will regret making an enemy of me," before storming back to her SUV and slamming the door so hard it echoed like a gunshot, leaving her entourage scrambling to follow. But her threat only made me smile, because I'd already decided that if she wanted war, then war she would get, except I wasn't going to fight with yelling matches or legal jargon. I was going to outthink her at every turn her arrogance into her undoing, and let her trap herself again and again until she had no ground left to stand on. That afternoon, I reinforced the bridge back to its original safe condition, because I didn't actually want anyone hurt, just humiliated. And then I sat back on my porch and thought through the next phase, because Karen wasn't the type to back off after one loss. She was the type to escalate, to try to hit harder, and I needed to be ready when she did, so I considered all her options. She could try to get the county involved by filing bogus complaints. She could rally her HOA minions into some kind of harassment campaign, or she could try to sneak construction equipment across my land again. And sure enough, 2 days later, I got my answer when I heard the distinct growl of engines not from the road, but from the backside of my property, near the old fence line that bordered the HOA's land. And when I grabbed my binoculars and peered through the trees, I saw it. Karen had ordered bulldozers and a backhoe to start cutting a rough trail along the creek, clearly intending to bypass my bridge entirely by forging her own path onto the build site, which would have been comical if it weren't so infuriating, because the land she was tearing up wasn't. Hers either was county-owned greenbelt meant to prevent erosion, and watching those machines chew into the bank made my blood boil, but it also gave me a wicked idea. If Karen wanted to bulldoze her way around me, I would let her dig her own hole, literally and figuratively, and then make sure the right authorities saw it. So that night, I hiked out under cover of darkness with a flashlight and my trail cameras, setting them up at key angles where they would capture the dozers tearing into the restricted zone, their treads ripping apart soil that was supposed to be protected. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how perfect this was, because unlike my bridge, which she could spin as a neighborly disagreement, tearing up county conservation land was a serious violation, one that came with fines steep enough to make even the most arrogant HOA president sweat. And by the time I got back to my porch, mud on my boots and a grin on my face, I knew that the next round of this battle wasn't going to end with me humiliating her. It was going to end with the county slamming her with penalties so crushing that her precious community project might never recover. And the best part was, she wouldn't even realize I had set that trap until it was far too late to escape. The downfall of Karen and her cement truck crusade came faster than even I could have imagined, though not without a fair amount of drama, because once I had the trail cameras set and recording her bulldozers clawing into the protected creek banks, I knew I had something more powerful than any argument. Undeniable, time-stamped proof of illegal activity. So I spent the next couple of days compiling the footage, backing it up on multiple drives, and even printing off still frames showing the machines tearing through the greenbelt with HOA logos plastered on their sides. And when I finally made the call to the county environmental office, I didn't have to wait long for results, because within a week, inspectors in bright orange vests were out there, cameras in hand, jotting notes and shaking their heads as they surveyed the deep ruts carved by Karen's equipment. And the look on her face when she stormed out to confront them was pure theater, because she tried everything arguing that the trail was temporary access, that it was for the good of the community, even that she had permission from some vague county official whose name she couldn't quite remember. But the inspectors weren't buying it, and one of them even pointed at my birdhouse camera still bolted to the tree line, saying, "We've already received submitted footage," which made Karen's face pale beneath her layers of makeup. Over the next 2 weeks, the consequences snowballed. The county slapped the HOA with a cease and desist order, fines totaling tens of thousands for environmental damage, and a mandate to restore the creek bank at their own expense, which sent shockwaves through the HOA membership, because suddenly their dues were being funneled into fixing a mess that Karen had personally caused, and whispers of revolt began circulating at their meetings, whispers I could hear clear as day, because the gossip made its way down the road to me through sympathetic neighbors who thought Karen had finally bitten off more than she could chew. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down in typical fashion, refusing to accept blame, pointing fingers at contractors at the county at me, calling me a saboteur, and even mailing me bogus letters claiming I owed retroactive infrastructure fees for the bridge, which only made her look more unhinged when I posted one of the letters online alongside the county violation notices, and suddenly half the town was laughing at her antics. Then came the ultimate humiliation, the day I'll never forget. The county scheduled a formal inspection to ensure the HOA had halted construction, and Karen, desperate to prove she still had control, marched a caravan of her loyalists down to my bridge with the audacity to demand passage again, clipboard in hand, yelling at the inspectors that they needed to see the community access point. But as fate would have it, the first vehicle in her parade, a pickup loaded with lumber, rolled a little too close to the patched section where I'd reinforced the false planks, and though I had since secured the bridge for my own use, the extra weight of the overloaded truck was too much, and the entire left side sagged dramatically before holding, leaving the vehicle tilted at such an angle that everyone gasped and backed away. The inspectors turned on Karen, demanding to know why she was still trying to use an unsafe, privately owned bridge after being told to cease trespassing, and that was the nail in the coffin, because she couldn't spin it, couldn't deflect, couldn't charm her way out, not with half a dozen witnesses watching her scheme collapse in real time. And when one inspector turned to me and asked, "Sir, are you willing to provide testimony regarding these repeated trespasses?" I smiled, tipped my hat, and said, with pleasure, sealing her fate. Within a month, Karen was forced to step down as HOA president after a revolt from her own board. The community center project was scrapped due to lack of funds, and the HOA itself was drowning in legal fees from both the county fines and angry members demanding refunds. But the sweetest victory wasn't just her downfall. It was the peace that returned to my land. Mornings with coffee by the creek without the thunder of cement trucks, evenings watching the sun set across a bridge that, despite all it had been through, still stood strong, a symbol of resilience against arrogance. And whenever I walked across it, I couldn't help but grin at the memory of Karen's face the day her cement truck fell into my trap, her empire of intimidation crumbling plank by plank, until finally all that remained was silence. The kind of silence I had dreamed of when I first bought my little paradise, proof that no matter how loud or powerful someone thinks they are, they can never outmatch a determined homeowner with a sharp mind, a strong will, and a well placed trap that they never saw coming.